Is everybody ready to get started tonight? Okay, I'm going to turn this over then to Father Joe for his story. Oh, no, that was last week. That's right. Okay. How many of you were here last week? Okay. Then I can make mine nice and easy. I met Father Joe at DST because everybody knows DST, and I followed him into ministry. So, well, let's go ahead and get started tonight. It's great to be here. I think this is the first time in quite a while that I've been able to share my whole story. So, for the next 3 hours, I hope that you'll be entertained with. I've got some pictures of my grandchildren and of our vacation to Virginia and a few other things that I want to throw in there. But anyway, as you all know, I am a little bit different category than most priests in the Catholic Church, as I am a married priest. And so it's been quite a journey for Sandy and I in terms of how we got where we are. And I still pinch myself at the great gift that the Holy Father has given me in terms of being able to be ordained a priest and the journey that Sandy and I have had together as we've gone through some very interesting turns and twists on our ministry journey. Anyway, let me just start by saying I grew up in East Aurora, New York, just outside of Buffalo. So it's a place where we have 2 seasons, winter and 2 weeks of summer. And that's about it. But I grew up active in the church. I was an Episcopalian. And an Episcopalian, of course, is one who goes to the Episcopal Church. A friend of mine called that Catholic light. You had liturgy, but you didn't have a lot of the other stuff that the Catholic Church did. But I grew up in that church. That's the church of my heritage for numbers of generations. And so it was very normal, and I got very involved in the church. I was an altar server. I knew all the prayers by heart. And in fact, when I was an altar server, the altar server master, the head of the altar servers, gave me a special award. I got the Congressional Medal of Altar Servers Honor. And it came because of midnight mass on Christmas Eve. And I was carrying a torch. And I was carrying it down the aisle. And I got to the steps leading up toward the sanctuary. And as I went up the first step, I kicked the bottom of the torch. And all of the wax from the beeswax candle came down on my face. And I was just covered with wax. I looked like the Phantom of the Opera. And I kept going. Burning, burning, burning. And I sat there through the whole Mass just picking wax off my face. So because of the fact that I didn't go into hysterics and all of that, the head of the acolytes, the head of the altar servers said, "Good job, and I want to give you a special award for that." But anyway, like some people, and I do not recommend this, so tell any teenagers you know this is not the right way to do it, but when I was in high school, I began to drift away from the church. I started playing drums in a rock and roll band, and that took care of most of it. And then I got involved, one of my high school jobs, I started working at a radio station and ended up as a rock and roll DJ on the radio. Randolph W. Sly playing the hits. And that took care of my spiritual journey. I was now really caught up in myself. I was full of myself, and I was also, this is when I was 19 and 20 years of age, I was already just disc jockey on our city's #1 hot top 40 radio station. And I was exposed to a lot of things that a 19 and 20-year-old shouldn't be exposed to. And so it was really kind of an interesting time in my life that lasted less than what I anticipated. My vision was I was going to go to Chicago and then to New York, and I was going to be big-time radio DJ. Well, all of that changed because this was during Vietnam. And I was in college, but I learned 2 very important things. If you don't go to class and you don't do any work, you don't get good grades. It's amazing how that works. And so I ended up with a very unsuccessful college experience, which left me with a great award called a 1A, which meant I was eligible for the draft. And as I was eligible for the draft, I thought, I am not going to be drafted into the Army and go to Vietnam. I'm going to do something else. Well, as a DJ, I'd done this radio commercial for the Naval Reserve, and it sounded great. You know, cruise ships in the Mediterranean and wonderful meals at sea. I mean, I just thought this would be wonderful. So I joined the Navy, and the Navy sent me to Vietnam. I was on board a destroyer, and it was really quite a learning experience for me. In the Navy, I learned that being full of yourself doesn't last very long. It took about 2 days of boot camp for that to be drilled out of me. When I remember showing up to boot camp, and we had this guy in charge of us, and he said, he came in the first day, and he says, "Men, my name is Torpedoman Chief Deffabaugh, and I am your mama, I am your papa, and I am your God." It was at that point I prayed my first Hail Mary. So I thought, I need some intercession for this. But seriously, the Navy was quite an experience. The first thing I learned, I was mortal. I landed in Da Nang, Vietnam, to get onto my destroyer, and as I landed, I went into this receiving center, and there I saw guys my own age lying on the floor, missing pieces of their body, bloody bandages, and I thought, I may not get out of this. And for the first time in my life, I realized I was not immortal, that I could die. And that was scary. And I also learned that there was a lot more to life than merely fun and fame, that there had to be more substantive things in my life. And it was neat how God used this, because after being in Vietnam, I was home ported in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, not bad a duty station after being in Vietnam. And it was there in Pearl Harbor that one day I was on liberty going down the beach at Waikiki, and I heard this band playing music, and it sounded really cool. They were on the beach, and I thought, this is great. I found a palm tree, lots of shade, sat down there and listened to the music, and all of a sudden I thought, well, they're not talking about some guy losing his girlfriend or a hot rod car. They're singing about God. Wow, that's different. So I listened some more, and I thought, this is great. I just love their music. And they seem to have just this real sense of joy about them. Well, after they were done, 2 of the guys from the group came over and sat down with me under the palm tree and began to talk to me. And we talked about a lot of stuff, and I said, what are you guys doing here? And he said, we're here because we have come to Hawaii to tell people about Jesus. I went, oh man, let me tell you, I grew up in the church. I was an altar server. I told them about my Congressional Medal of Honor. You know, I told them about all of the things that I had done growing up in the church. And they said, well, then you must know we're here talking about Jesus and the fact that he paid the price for your sins. And they went on and kept talking about Jesus. And then I countered by talking about my youth group and the things that I did in the church and all of that. And they were so much fun to be around, I talked to them for another day and went back. It was just fun to be with them. And so at that point, after about 2 days, I was walking down the beach, and I was about ready to meet with them again, and all of a sudden it hit me. I was talking about the building, and they were talking about the occupant. There was something different in what they were saying than what I was sharing. And at that moment, I just prayed probably for the first time in a long time, other than under rocket attacks and things like that. But I prayed, Lord, I don't know what they're talking about. I don't know what this is all about. All I know is that I really know I need you in my life. And at that moment, wham, I had one of those conversion experiences that rarely happens, but it happened to me. 1 minute I was going this way, and the next minute I was going that way. I was so in love with Jesus, so in love with God. Went out and I bought a Bible for the first time in years. And I actually read it. And I just couldn't get enough of being around those guys. So for the month that they were there in Hawaii, I spent all of my off hours with this group, just listening to what they were saying about Jesus. And it was a powerful, powerful time. And after that time of transformation, I was then released from active duty in the Navy and was sent home so I could complete my Naval Reserve commitment, but at the same time I could go back to work. So I went back to work in radio as the disc jockey, as I did before, and did some broadcast journalism as a news reporter on the radio and all of that good stuff. And I went back to my Episcopal church that I had grown up in. Well, this was during the early 70s, and this is when the church that I was a part of was going off the rails. There was a couple of bishops like Bishop Pike and others that were starting to say, we don't believe in the resurrection. We don't believe in those things anymore. That's just a bunch of myths. And that was at the time where they began ordaining women. They were pro-abortion. They were dealing very weirdly about sexual issues within the church. And the doctrines and the teachings of the church kept shifting. And I felt this is not what I signed up for when I asked Jesus to have my life. And so at that point, while all of that was going on, I had taken on this one project, the radio station, of doing a documentary program called Project Battle Creek, because the radio station was Battle Creek, Kalamazoo, Lansing area. And so I was doing a documentary. And I thought there was a listing of the different topics that were suggested, and one of them I thought would be really cool because it talked about this youth group ministry for the Jesus movement in the inner city of Battle Creek, that they were sharing the gospel with motorcycle riders and other street people, and I thought they'd be interesting to interview. So the president and the vice president of the youth group came, a guy and a girl, and I interviewed them on the radio. We had a blast. It was so much fun talking about the things that they were doing. And anyway, we got through with that interview. It was a really successful interview. And just about, I think it was the next day, I got a call on the phone from the girl who was one of those that I had interviewed. And she said, "Would you like to visit our church and see what we're doing?" And I said, "Sure." By the way, just in case you wanted to know, the girl that I interviewed on the radio is sitting right over there. I interviewed Sandy, and the president of the youth group, who became a friend of hers and a good friend of mine, too, over the years. We still keep in contact. But she invited me to visit her church, and I found in that church the life that I had desired and the excitement for the faith that I had. And so I left my church and began being a part of the Wesleyan Methodist Church. And it was from there that things began to happen. In November 17th, 1972, the first big thing happened. Sandy and I were married. And so we're going to be 50 years this year, so that's pretty cool. And I had already gone back to school. This time, I remembered to go to class and do my homework. I graduated on the dean's list in philosophy and religion, and then we went on to seminary. And so after seminary, we entered into ministry, and we've always been a team in ministry, where she's really supported and helped and given leadership in areas of women's ministry and other things. So it was a great team effort as we entered into our ministry together in the Wesleyan Methodist Church. And that went on for a long time. I was a pastor, and I also continued to do media and other things in radio and TV in ministry along with everything. And so we went from Michigan. We then had a church we went to Oklahoma for a while, and then we ended up in Manhattan, Kansas. And that was our last church with the Wesleyan Methodists, was there in Manhattan, Kansas, the home of Kansas State University. Go Wildcats. So anyway, it was at that time that something began to happen in me. I had gone full speed into the world of evangelicalism, which was accompanied by non-liturgical worship. And I had become convinced at that time that liturgy was an impediment to my relationship with God, that worship was to be something of the heart, and that liturgy blocked the opportunity for true worship because it was feeling-oriented, me and Jesus just hanging out together that was most important. Now, the problem was that I had that conviction, but haunting me deep inside was this sense that I wanted to return to the liturgy of the church in which I had grown up. That there was something there in the liturgy and in the sacraments from my past, and I couldn't shake it. And so here I am, I've got this wonderful ministry going on. The church that we had in Manhattan, Kansas, was one of the larger churches in our entire denomination. We had some national prominence. And at the same time, I began to question my ministry, began to question the church itself, and just wondering, is this all there is to ministry? What I'm doing, I'm preaching and we're singing, and that's basically what church was all about. And I began rethinking things like liturgy and theology and the sacraments and the church fathers. And at that point, I did the only logical thing I could possibly do in that particular situation. I determined that I had to destroy this desire. I had to get rid of it. I had to make sure that this longing to return to historic Christianity was nothing but an empty, romantic, sentimental thing from my past. And so I began to do reading about worship. And most of the readings that I first did were from evangelical readers and others that were citing even the Old Testament and the feasts of Passover and Pentecost and Feast of Weeks and all of the other things that had types and shadows. And I kept going there, but all at the same time, because of things that I had learned in seminary, I kept going, but what about John chapter 6 and Jesus teaching about the Eucharist? What about 1 Corinthians chapter 9 through 11, where Paul is giving us an outline of how the Eucharist is to be celebrated? What do I do with all that? What do I do with the fact that you have not cited one church father in making your assumptions about the early church? So I thought, well, okay, I'm going to keep going in this direction because I've got to destroy this thing. I had an opportunity at that point to meet an individual who was very formative in my life at that moment. His name was Father Peter Gilquist. He was a former director of Campus Crusade for Christ who had become an Antiochian Orthodox priest. And I was sitting with Father Peter one day, and I said, you know, the problem that I have in my life is that I'm a victim of dead liturgy. And he looked at me with this quizzical eye, and he said, dead liturgy? He says, let me tell you, liturgy cannot be dead or alive. It's either true or false. It's people who are dead or alive. And I went, oh my goodness. This has really got me thinking in a different direction. And it also helped me to realize that I had a group of alive people in my church, but was I giving them a true liturgy or a false liturgy? Was I leading them to God, or what was I doing? So I thought, you know what I'm going to do now? I'm going to keep trying to destroy this. And I thought, I know what I need. I need to have someone that can help me to uncover the fallacy of liturgy. I need an Anglican free thinker, somebody who thinks outside the box. And I said, I know who it is, C.S. Lewis. And I'd read Lewis. I loved C.S. Lewis a lot. And I found a book that I had never read before called Letters to Malcolm, chiefly on prayer. And I read that book because in the summary that was on the back cover, it said that Lewis will discuss liturgy. And I thought, yes, just what I need. So I opened the book to the first chapter. And there, almost the first line, and this is a sly paraphrase, he says, my dear Malcolm, before I begin to talk to you about prayer, I need to talk to you about why I love the liturgy so much. And I went, oh, no. But I kept reading. And he said some things that were amazing for me to hear. One of the things he said is, one of the great gifts that God has given us in the liturgy of the church is an opportunity to be in the presence of God and not be surprised by what's taking place next. I can fully concentrate on God and not what's going on around me. I thought about my worship services that I had put together for my Wesleyan Methodist church, and I thought, oh man, it's like a sideshow sometimes, trying to give these people an experience so that they can feel God. And then he said this, and this is what really cut me to the quick. He said, and remember, my dear Malcolm, our Lord said, feed my sheep, not experiment on my rats. And it was at that moment that I had this panorama of all of the things that I did every Sunday with our people, changing things up, moving things around, changing what we did. Sometimes right in the middle of our worship, I would change where we're going in order to keep people entertained so they could get into God. And I realized that what I was doing is I was running my people through this maze of worship, like a bunch of rats, so that we could get to the cheese at the end, which was God's presence. Well, that book was my undoing and began a journey that took me where we are now. And it was a really powerful thing. We left the Wesleyan Methodist Church and we began to look at other options. In fact, one of the things we did is we moved from Manhattan, Kansas to Olathe, Kansas, because there were some like-minded people there that were also feeling the same thing we were. And so we looked at Anglicanism. I talked with Father Peter Gilquist about orthodoxy. We looked at all these things, and by the way, when all of this is going on, I have a champion by my side, somebody who has stuck with me, even though that's not her history or background. Sandy, she grew up Dutch Reformed, and from there entered the Wesleyan Methodist Church. That was her world. And so I'm talking about liturgy and sacraments and Eucharist and the real presence of Jesus and all of these things. And she's going, oh my. But she studied and she prayed. And I'll never forget, one day, in fact, it was here in Kansas City. We were driving down Meyer Boulevard. And I can't remember where we were going, but we were driving along, and all of a sudden she looks over and she says, I get it. I went, okay, you get it. Get what? And she said, I get it all. And she had been praying and praying and pouring her heart out to the Lord, and all of a sudden the Lord just gave her this image, this understanding of the liturgy, the sacraments, and all of it. It just kind of unfolded to her to the point where she said, I see what you're talking about now. And it was a moment where we became united in our journey now toward whatever it was that God wanted to do. So at that time, we ended up becoming a part of a smaller Anglican denomination. And it was wonderful. I was ordained a priest. Later, I was consecrated a bishop and made an archbishop. And so I'm kind of compacting about 14 years of life that we lived. It was an amazing experience. We traveled the world. We saw things we never thought we'd see. There were exciting times of ministry. It was just a wonderful opening up of a liturgical, sacramental world to us through this Anglican denomination where we could minister freely with the things that God was putting into our hearts. But even though we were in this Anglican church for a number of years, there was one thing that I kept struggling with. See, in my work as a bishop, of course, a bishop has to be consecrated or ordained in apostolic succession. You need to somehow be able to trace your apostolic succession back to Peter, the See of Peter, which we could do. Even in the Anglican world, you could go ahead and do this tracing. But the problem was, I was haunted by the question, by what authority did those bishops ordain you a bishop? It's supposed to be done in communion with the Holy Father. But of course, we were separated from Rome, have been since Henry VIII and all that he did to separate the church. But we were continued to looking back toward Rome as the connection for our apostolic succession. By what authority are you being a bishop? By what authority are you ordaining and confirming and doing all of the things that you're doing? From a Catholic point of view, what I had received was valid but not licit. It was not a legal ordination because it did not have the approval of the Holy Father in Rome. Well, that was a struggle that I was going through, and in addition, there was a lot of theological shifting sand within Anglicanism because there is no magisterium like we have in the Catholic Church, where we have a fixed teaching office that really helps to establish what it is that we believe. I remember being at one House of Bishops where the question was asked, okay, we've had one of our bishops ask if we really need to believe in 7 sacraments. Can we take it down to 2? Can we believe in baptism and Holy Communion like the historic Anglicans do and take all the other ones and make those optional? And I sat there thinking to myself, who am I to make a decision like that that's going to affect the salvation and the souls of so many people in our denomination? And it began to really, really worry me. And so at this same time, while these struggles were going on, I was reading Catholic theology and drawn to the magisterium, to the teaching office of the church and all that that provided. And at the same time being haunted by what I was expressing as an archbishop in this church. And Sandy and I also began reading some other books like Rome Sweet Home by Scott Hahn and other books that talked about people that had come into the Catholic Church. And I won't go into a lot of the detail, but over a period of years and a lot of different influences, we both felt called to come into the Catholic Church. But we didn't think we should do it because we were responsible for the souls of those in our care, in our diocese, our province, in our church around the world. I was at this point the second highest bishop in authority in our denomination internationally. And we both thought, we just can't do it. We can't leave these people behind. Well, it's interesting what happened. A little later on, our presiding bishop got into trouble. It wasn't moral, it was financial. He got into trouble with the finances of the church and caused a lot of problems, particularly in the United States. And at that point, everything began to break open. 7 bishops resigned and went to other Anglican denominations. Everything was up in upheaval. People were wondering, well, who's going to take over the church and what's going to happen? And at that point, with all of this going on, Sandy and I really felt if there's ever a time that we can leave, now is it, because they've got to settle everything back again in a new normal, and we're not convinced that we're a part of that. So it was at that point that we chose to leave our denomination. So I resigned all of my faculties as an archbishop. I left the position, I left my pension, income, everything behind, and Sandy and I came into the Roman Catholic Church in 2006. I came in as a Catholic layman. And from the time that we came into the church, I thought, perhaps there will be a bishop. There was a thing called the pastoral provision, which allowed Anglican clergy to be ordained Catholic priests, but the pastoral provision had to be done diocese by diocese, and it would cost a diocese several thousands of dollars to do it, to make that commitment to an individual. And there was no bishop that had really been open. There's only about a handful of men that had even pursued that particular route. There's one here in Kansas City who was a dear friend of mine from back in our Anglican days, Father Ernie Davis, was a part of the pastoral provision. So anyway, I was a Catholic layman. As I used to explain it to people, 1 week I was carrying my crozier and wearing my mitre in the procession. 2 weeks later I was pushing a broom at the pancake breakfast. And we were thrilled. We knew that we had done what God had called us to do. We became active parishioners at Our Lady of Hope Catholic Church in Potomac Falls, Virginia, where we were living at the time, because we had moved to Virginia when I was an archbishop. And so I was a lector, an extraordinary minister of Holy Communion. I led a weekly Bible study, and I was a very, very proud member of the Knights of Columbus. I went to the 4th degree. I held just about every office in the council except Grand Knight. I couldn't do that because I was being ordained. And they don't let priests be Grand Knight, which I was glad for. It's a lot easier being a priest than it is Grand Knight. Less paperwork. But seriously, I was also faithful navigator of the assembly that I was at the 4th degree. Sandy was very involved in the women's ministry of the church. And of course, we had to kind of reinvent ourselves because I'd look in the yellow pages, or the classifieds, to see if there was anything for out-of-work archbishops listed, No, nothing there. And so basically, I hung up a shingle and began a marketing, communications, and media company. And Sandy went to work as well, working in the radiology department at Reston Hospital, ultimately working in the Women's Imaging Center there. And so that was our life. And we just lived it out, not knowing that we would ever go any place farther than where we were in terms of what we were about. But then November 4th, 2009, 3 years later, came about. Anglicanorum Cedibus, an apostolic constitution by Pope Benedict XVI that welcomed and invited Anglican and Episcopal parishes to come into full communion with the Catholic Church, and in addition, an invitation to Anglican and Episcopal clergy to be able to apply for holy orders in the Catholic Church. And I thought, wow, this just might be it. The only problem is I'm already a Catholic. I'm out of. I should have just waited. I should have disobeyed God and stayed out of the church until now. Well, thankfully, I found out Anglicanorum Cedibus counted for those of us who had already come in. So, in June of 2011, 2 years later, the Holy Father approved Anglicanorum Cedibus, which are set up ordinariates, which are like non-geographic dioceses in different areas of the world, and the United States was approved for one in June of 2011. And I was one of the first ones to submit my application for ordination at that time. Now, this was all done with Rome. We had to send a dossier to the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith, which is, in Rome, it's the place that deals with our faith, our doctrines, and also things like irregular people coming into the church, like myself. So we sent in a dossier. It was about between 2 and 3 inches thick, full of everything that I'd ever done in my life. It included letters of recommendation. It included my transcripts, everything I'd done in ministry, and one other thing. It included a letter of permission from my wife, because they wanted to know that she was okay with what we're doing. So that was all sent to Rome. And again, it kind of goes into this cloud called the Vatican. We don't know what's going to happen. 6 months later, I get a response from the Vatican. I get what is called officially a nulla osta, which means no impediment. A nulla osta actually means there is a possibility at some time in the future, should it ever come about, that maybe perhaps if somebody ever wanted to do it, that you might be able to be ordained a priest in the Roman Catholic Church. It was that specific. But it also asked for more information, several psychological inventories, a visit with a psychologist. My wife had to go through the same thing with an inventory and a psychiatric evaluation. It included more letters of recommendation, security clearances, you name it, more stuff. The dossier got a lot thicker and went right back to Rome. 6 months later. By the way, you have to know, 6 months at the Vatican is an instant message. I mean, that's fast for the Vatican to operate. 6 months later, so it's been now a year, I receive from Rome a rescript, which means I can be and should be ordained a priest in the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. And it also was accompanied by a dispensation from celibacy. Good thing. Now, you have to understand that both of these, both permission to be ordained and the dispensation from celibacy, came from Pope Benedict himself. He personally approved every single one of us for our ordination to the priesthood. So that gave us the ability, if anybody said, well, which bishop got a wild hair, and decided to go ahead and ordain you? No, the Pope himself gave us permission. And so that came, and after a seminary refresher that I received through St. Mary's Seminary in Houston, in June of 2012, I was one of the first in the United States to be ordained a deacon and then a priest for the ordinariate. So I'm of the first 10 for our country, actually for our continent, because it also included Canada. And so here we go. We're into ministry now. And I've got to tell you, as adventurous and exciting this sounds, the most courageous person in this whole story is my wife. We were a team in Protestant ministry. Being a married clergy in Protestantism is the norm. When we came into the Catholic Church, she had to be courageous enough to step into a role that has absolutely no definition. The wife of a Catholic priest. And not knowing what that might look like, and still probably today we're still wondering, what is that all about? Especially not serving in an ordinariate where a lot of the other priests are ordained, but rather being on loan to our diocese, we're in a kind of a different place. But we entered into ministry in Northern Virginia, organizing a small community for the ordinariate, and I served as an assisting priest in our home parish of Our Lady of Hope, which was a great gift. The place where we had been nurtured and encouraged as Catholics, I was now serving sacramentally as a priest. Where I had been the faithful navigator at the assembly, I was now the faithful friar. It was amazing what God can do. And then in June of 2015, the ordinary for the ordinariate asked if we would move to Kansas City to take over an ordinariate parish here and also to serve in the diocese. Actually, it started about a year before, and the bishop said, I'd like you to meet with Father Joe Chisetti out at St. Therese North to see if the two of you hit it off. Obviously, we hit it off great. But I've got to tell you how unique that is, because the norm is not for the priest and the associate to sit down and determine whether or not you're going to work together. It's usually the bishop saying, you're going here and you're going here. But thankfully, we were sent here to our place at St. Therese, and also in charge of the ordinary community, which was very small at the time. Then Bishop Johnston arrived about 6 months after I did. And the rest, as they say, is history. That's when, in 2016, he asked me to go to Our Lady of Sorrows to serve first as a parochial administrator and then as pastor. That was a total of 3 years. But in the midst of that, to become the president of St. Michael the Archangel Catholic High School in Lee Summit, which I've done for the last 4 years. But thankfully, in 2021, it's kind of like the book was it Bilbo Baggins that wrote There and Back Again? I would like Bilbo Baggins. I'm there and back again. So here we are at St. Therese. So that's how I got here, and that's why we're among you. So a little longer than what I had in my notes, but I kind of rabbit trailed a couple of times. We have just a couple of minutes if somebody has a question. Yes, Gail. Oh, I do have children. Hello. That's one of the things I skipped because I looked at the clock and thought, oh boy. We have 3 grown children, Dina, Debbie, and David. 2 of them, all of us lived in Virginia for a while, but then Dina and Deb and their families both moved back to Kansas City because they graduated from high school and college out here. And so they came back here with our grandchildren. That's one of the reasons that the ordinary said, why don't you go to Kansas City? Our son still lives with his wife and our other grandson in Leesburg, Virginia, near where we used to live. And he still claims that we ran away from home when we came out here. But we see him as often as we can, especially with our grandson Jason, who has just turned a little over a year now. I have pictures to follow. No, I got about 500 pictures to show you. But so Dina and Deb and their families are here in the Kansas City area. Our Deb and Scott's number 3 child is Noah Wilson of Noah's Bandage Project, that you may have heard of. So, anyway. Oh, yeah, they came in with us. Yeah, no, we all came in together, which was wonderful at the time. So, they went through RCIA so that all of the questions could be kind of worked out. But through the process of all of this, and that's something I didn't bring up, through the process of all of these moves and changes in what we were doing, we held family meetings. So we all knew what everybody was thinking about where we might be heading. I'm glad you brought that up, because this was not done where we kept blindsiding our kids. Well, we're going to do this now. Yeah, well, we're going to do that now. No, it was always, especially the move into the Catholic Church. We had many family meetings on Sunday night where we would get together and talk about where we were all going. And thankfully, all 3 families chose to be received into the church. Yes. I do. Yes. Dina, our oldest daughter, her oldest son, Alex, is a college seminarian for the Archdiocese of Kansas City in Kansas. So as my brother priests tell me, that he's going into the family business. But yeah, she has 4 boys, and they're all, 2 of them are graduates of St. James Academy. A 3rd one is there. A 4th one is going there next year. Alex is at Kenrick Glennon, finishing his college work, and will anticipate going on to major seminary there as well. Yeah. Alex was here and served Mass with me. He's done that a couple of times, in fact. So, all right. Well, I thank you for being attentive and listening to my story. Father Joe, I want to turn it over to you if you want to give us a closing. Yeah. Is it the Marriott? Whatever that airport is, yeah. Hotel. It was a secret visit, yeah. Well, that's the truth. Yeah.
So anyway, and so just stay tuned next week. The next exciting installment. Father Angel is going to tell you how he ended from a little village on the border of Guatemala to here. So there's more to come. So thank you all.
Yeah. Oh, praise God.
I wanted to tell the kids at the dance to go to it.
Yeah. By the way, this is being videotaped, and all of the ones following are also going to be taped. So if you know of people that have not visited or been here for Soup and Speaker, we're going to be videotaping all of them from this point on, from tonight onward to the rest. We were going to do it, we thought about it, but then we forgot about it for last week.